Now, meanwhile, more than 50 African leaders are in Beijing to attend a two-day China-Africa Forum for Cooperation amid increasing criticism of its debt-laden approach to aid in the developing world. The once every three-year conference typically sees China dole out large loan packages for the continent. Now, Xi announced $60 billion in assistance and loans for Africa during the last summit in South Africa in 2015. Now, Beijing has been China's biggest trading partner over the last decade, and its resources have helped fuel China's transformation into the world's second largest economy.
Transport of China and the Department of Transport of South Africa on cooperation in transport-related matters.
Good to see you again. Good to see you.
All right. Now, I'd like us to cross over to China and speak to our political affairs reporter, Muremi Mwangi, just to bring us up to date with that meeting that's happening in China and what we expect. Muremi, can I say good morning? Because I don't know that it's still early in the morning because here it's 9:19 in Kenya. But kindly bring us up to date with what's making the headlines in China. What do you expect from that meeting?
Well, perhaps I should say good afternoon because it's around 2 p.m. here in Beijing, China. The venue for the 7th Forum on China-Africa Cooperation. Remember, this is a partnership that is not new to Kenya. The symbol of that, of course, being the SGR, the very first phase having been done in a record 2.5 years, Mombasa to Nairobi. The construction of Mombasa or Nairobi to Naivasha ongoing now. And President Uhuru Kenyatta is attending this particular forum, and it is expected that perhaps he will be seeking funding for the completion of that particular project from Naivasha to Kisumu. Remember, it is a project that has so far from Mombasa to Nairobi cost 327 billion. Add that to 150 from Nairobi to Naivasha, and it is expected that the Kenyan government will be seeking an additional 380 billion for the connection from Naivasha to Kisumu. And it is a partnership that is widely expected to feed into China's own road and bridges, or bridges and belt initiative that is, of course, tied to Vision 2030 as well as the African Vision 2063. And this, of course, is meant to synergize the Chinese expansion in terms of infrastructure into the African continent with Africa's own development agenda, and discussions are ongoing. Tomorrow, President Uhuru Kenyatta is expected to participate in bilateral talks with the delegation from the Chinese government side, and that, of course, is meant to enhance the particular deals that will be signed, and this is in line with the Jubilee government's push to have infrastructural development continue, as was the case in President Uhuru Kenyatta's first term. Remember, in President Kenyatta's second term, there is a focus on what he calls the big four: manufacturing, healthcare, education, and these are some of the initiatives that he will be seeking fresh partnership with the Chinese government. Brenda.
Muremi, President Kenyatta is returning to Beijing amid criticism of the rise of debt that Kenya has. Might that be something they might talk about during that meeting?
Well, it is a challenge not only to Kenya, but many other African countries that have sought partnerships with the Chinese government. But remember, much of the focus of the Kenyan government has been about changing the policy so that this funding does not cripple the industries back home. Remember, China has been pushing to have a free trade agreement with the East African community. And of course, Kenya at some point reneged from any such deal, arguing for an AGOA kind of agreement that would protect Kenya's nascent manufacturing sector. And therefore, it is a discussion that we expect will pursue that particular line. Remember, in this particular year's forum, there is push to have a win-win kind of cooperation. And therefore, President Uhuru Kenyatta will, of course, be seeking to have a partnership that does not in any way seem to cripple the local industries, even as the manufacturing sector and, of course, the infrastructure projects from the Chinese side get into the Kenyan side. Brenda.
Moremi, and lastly, as we bring this conversation to an end, President Xi Jinping invited all African members of all members of the African Union except Switzerland. Moremi, if you can hear me.
I seem to have lost you, Brenda. Perhaps you could come again.
Okay, my question is, President Xi Jinping seems to have invited all members of the African Union except Switzerland, because on claims that it recognizes Taiwan, and topics on all range from economic ties to trade and cultural exchanges. Is it something of a major concern to some of the African Union members that are attending that meeting?
Well, I was in the opening ceremony this morning. There seems not to be much focus on that particular issue, but it is one that perhaps as the bilateral talks happen tomorrow with a separate meeting of the heads of state and President Xi Jinping might come up. Remember, part of the partnerships between Africa and China have largely been premised on the fact that China has kept off what is called the sovereignty of the particular states with which they are participating. Remember, that has been put to criticism in some quarters, but of course for Africa and particularly for Kenya, the insistence has been on partnerships that work for what is for the common mwananchi. This in terms of infrastructure, for instance, which President Uhuru Kenyatta argues will be one that opens up the country to investment and also makes it easy for even investors from outside the country to also benefit from the same infrastructure. But of course, when that discussion will be happening tomorrow, the meeting between the heads of state from Africa and the Chinese delegation, it is a diplomatic issue that perhaps at that particular level they will be seeking to address. Brenda.
All right, thank you so much, Murimi Mwangi. That's a political affairs reporter, Murimi Mwangi, just bringing us up to date with that meeting that is happening in China. And of course, she shall continue bringing you the latest details. Now, the